Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is lesson number 13, and it's titled Interviews and Interrogation. Now, no case is complete until everyone is interviewed. That includes the victim, witnesses, people that might have information to the case, and of course the suspect or accomplices. What's the purpose? It's like the rest of the investigation. It's to reach the truth. That's all we're trying to do in law enforcement, is find the truth. Now, when we interview people, let's say witnesses to a possible crime, different people interpret things differently. And that could have to do with their age, could have to do with their race, could have to do with their education level. All kinds of things play into that. You know, a 16-year-old boy might interpret things different than a 65-year-old woman. The boy might be able to tell you what kind of gun somebody had in their hand and what kind of vehicle, make and model that they drove away in. And the mature woman might do better at describing the suspect, what he was wearing, age of the suspect, that kind of thing. Just keep that in mind. And then keep in mind that there's cooperative and uncooperative witnesses. So there's two real issues that we have to deal with. First of all, when you talk to a witness of a crime that may have just occurred, did the person you're talking to actually see or hear what they're relaying to you? Or did they hear it from somebody else? That's why you need to separate everybody as soon as possible when you have numerous witnesses. And in their excitement, they may miss some key things. So just keep that in mind and make sure you confirm that they actually saw what they're telling you, or they actually heard something said from the suspect or the victim or whatever. Not that they heard it from another witness and they're making assumptions. That's kind of a big problem. So that's one of the first problems with interviewing people right away. The second one is time. Normally, we would think that interviewing someone as soon after the incident is best, and usually it is. But sometimes in their excitement, they'll miss key points, and they may think about it over the next 24 hours and may get back with you and say, hey, I remember something I forgot to tell you. So sometimes you'll have to do that second interview. I think we talked about that in maybe patrol procedures. Always get name, phone numbers, addresses on all your witnesses so someone could follow up if they need to, or maybe you'd need to later. So those two issues. Did they actually hear or see what they're telling you? And how much time has elapsed, and how does time play into what they remember? Sometimes they forget things over the 24-hour period or week period, whatever it might be. So oftentimes the first 30-minute after the incident interview might be best. But just keep those things in mind. An interview is a conversation you have with someone who's cooperative, some person that wants to help you solve the crime, and most people do. One thing to keep in mind, even with a cooperative witness, they may not be telling you everything that they know because of a number of reasons. The main one being that they may be afraid of the suspect. And if they should tell you that, you want to make sure that's included in your report. It could be very important later on in trial. Now, interrogation, well, we don't use that term anymore. It's more like the term enhanced interviews. Back in the old days, interviews, interrogations of suspects would take place in small rooms, maybe a bright light shining in the suspect's face. They would try to break down the suspect to get a confession or get admissions out of him. So that was the whole goal of it, was to intimidate the person to the point where they gave up information. That changed, obviously. The courts changed that. The first thing that was changed was in 1932, and that was Powell versus Alabama. And that had to do with, if someone was being interviewed or interrogated back then, they had a right to an attorney if it was a death sentence type crime. If their life depended on it, the courts ruled that they could have an attorney. So that was in 1932. That was the first issue. The next one was Gideon versus Wainwright. And that was in 1963. And it enhanced what had happened earlier by saying that a defendant, when being interrogated, still used that term in 63, had a right to an attorney if the sentence could result in over a year imprisonment. So basically a felony. Now, all the public is aware of the Miranda decision, Miranda versus Arizona. It was in 1967. That gives a suspect the right to an attorney anytime they're the focus of the investigation and they're in custody. So when you're questioning someone and they're the focus of an investigation of a crime and they don't feel that they're free to leave, you have to give them what's called their Miranda rights. And we've discussed those before. If at any time during the interview they don't want to talk to you and they say they want an attorney, you have to stop talking to them. So those days of the past are gone, and rightfully so. They only remain in the movies, and I guess that's where they belong, because that's kind of the way it was back then. Today, we don't use those techniques. So today, we use what we call enhanced interview techniques. We don't try to break them down and into a confession or an admission. We use our skills to get them to trust you, that type of thing. And the best way to learn how to do that is watching others. Some people are natural. Some people just have those kind of communication skills, and they can just get somebody comfortable and get them talking, and they're very good at those interviews. Some officers pick that up very quickly, and you'll be trained in an academy how to do those kind of interviews and interrogations. But some will be better than others. So I would suggest that you find somebody that's very good at it and watch footage of them doing interviews, and that will help you a lot. I was very fortunate to be around, I guess I'll call him the great one, Lou Schmidt. Worked at Colorado Springs Police Department as a homicide detective. And you may be familiar with him. He worked on the John Benet Ramsey case. Had a completely different theory on that case, by the way. And I discussed that case with him a lot. But back to our point, I was fortunate to be at some crime scenes, some murder scenes with Lou Schmidt before I was in homicide. And I was also able to sit at his desk and spend hours listening to him explain to me the techniques he used to get people to confess. And his personality was such that he had kind of the grandfather aura about him, and people just trusted him. And so he would be able to sit with someone who was a suspect in a murder or rape maybe, and get their confidence to the point that they realized, you know what, this is the lesser of evils. I just need to tell him what really happened. And that was his specialty, and he was very good at it. And he passed some of that on to me, fortunately. And then I eventually ended up in homicide and used many of those skills that I learned from Lou Schmidt to obtain confessions and a lot of admissions for different crimes. So for you, you're not going to have Lou Schmidt to lean on. Need to find somebody in your department who's very good at interviewing, and watch the film of their interviews, and you'll pick up a lot. That's probably the best advice I can give you there. I would say another thing that I learned myself, and I think Lou kind of sent me in this direction, you need to stay tuned into the interview. Too many people are so busy trying to take notes that they're not really making that contact with the person that's talking, the suspect. So you have to be a very good listener, and you need to be able to look that person right in the eye and pull all that you can out of them. I'm not going to go into the special techniques that I've used because I've passed that on to other officers, and it's not stuff I really want out in the public, but there's skills that you learn, and you are able to read body language and basically pull information out of people by just paying attention, looking through the window of their soul, which is their eyes, and speak to them, basically. So, interviewing and interrogation, two different things. We don't use that word interrogation anymore, but you get the drift of this, I believe. And like I said, there's a lot of things that you can do. One of them is to know your case inside and out. And you may be taking over the case from someone else. You may be a detective now or whatever. But you need to know everything that's in that case. And you want this suspect to think in their mind that you know way more than you really do. And that's from knowing the case inside and out, and little hints you might throw out during the interview. So when they start feeling that you know everything already anyway, they're more likely to start making some admissions, and that might lead to an actual confession. Now, there's nothing better than a recorded, videotaped interview with a suspect where they confess. It's pretty hard for any defense attorney, no matter how good he is, to argue with that footage in court where his defendant is admitting to the murder or the robbery or whatever it might be. So you always film those interviews. And you don't want to do any trickery or anything like that. Could create problems. You want that footage to be admitted into court. So always record them. Nothing better than a taped confession. Pretty hard to argue. They're going to want to plead out to something. So that's kind of the basics again of interviews and interrogations. There's a lot of hours and hours of practice on real people doing interviews to really, tune those skills to the point that you can get people to talk, basically. So you have to work at it. That's it, I guess, for this situation. Again, if you're learning something from these, I would ask you to hit the like and subscribe to my channel. And I'll be back with another lesson very soon. Have a good day.